Hi there, my name's Finn. I'm a flight instructor in the southeast of the UK, and this video is all about operating from Redhill's runway 0725. It's a little bit of a different one. But first, before we get started, what I want to say is I've been instructing for a while now, and what I see time and time again is that the cockpit is really the hardest place to learn a new skill. And it's the students of mine that perform their best are the ones that have arrived at their session the best prepared. And that's because they're less likely to get overwhelmed by all the information coming at them when we're actually doing the flight. And you probably, if you're midway through your PPL training, or even if you've passed, you'll remember a lesson where you got overwhelmed and you just couldn't take on any more information. And so what these videos are all about is becoming the most prepared you can possibly be before going on those flights, to do your learning on the ground, rock up at your session fully prepared, so it goes nice and smoothly, and hopefully that the idea is you can pass your PPL on minimum hours. So we're going to talk about Redhill and 0725. I'm recording this at the start of October, and as you know, here in the UK, with the winter comes a bunch more rain than normal. And if you operate from a grass airfield, that means softer surfaces to a point where you can't use them anymore. And so at Redhill, we've got this facility that we can use, runway 0725, which is normally a taxiway, but it's fairly wide and fairly flat. And so we can use it as a runway when the grass areas are unavailable. So let me show you where it is. I've got a chart up here of Redhill. And you can see it's just this area down to the south of the airfield here. What we're going to look at today is some things you might want to take into consideration when we're using 0725 at Redhill. So the first thing I want to talk about is the circuit. Now, if you're not used to operating in and out of Redhill, a really good place to go and find some information is the Redhill Aerodrome website. And if you head to the pilot information and operational information page, can find lots of information, including this bit I'm going to show you, which is the fixed wing procedures for 0726, which is most likely to be in use. And this is a diagram of the circuit and the arrival and or departure VRP routes. So the thing to mention with the circuits on 07 and 25 compared to 0826, they're essentially the same, except you've got an ever so slightly longer base leg, but only by sort of 50 meters or so, and you won't really notice it while you're flying. The next thing to look at is the runway illusions. This runway, as you can see from this chart here, where's it gone? My chart here is slightly shorter and narrower than the normal runways if you're used to operating at Redhill, and certainly if you're used to operating from larger, more standard size runways, this is going to be a lot narrower and a lot shorter than you're used to. So that's going to feel like it's a lot further away on approach, which is going to make you want to fly a slightly lower approach than necessary. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And also, when you get to the flare, you're going to want to flare. Your brain is going to be telling you to flare later than you actually should be, because you're used to seeing more runway around you than you actually have here. So just be aware of those. On approach, what you can do to fix this is make sure you're using those standard heights that you would normally would. So about 500 feet above airfield elevation, should be the height that you turn from base to final. The threshold elevation for runway 26 and 25 and 07 is about 200 feet, so it should be about 700 feet, and you can use that as a judgment of your height. And then when you get down to the runway, make sure you're not just looking at the runway itself, but the environment all around, preferably just down past the end of the runway towards the trees and off to the side of the nose. It's the best place to look. Take in the whole environment, and that'll give you a good idea of how high you are when you should be flaring. So those are the possible runway illusions. The other thing to mention is the runway length. Now it's 498 meters long. If you're used to flying from Redhill, that's a fair bit shorter than the normal 26 left main runway that we would use. But it's worth mentioning that with better performance on the hard surface compared to the grass, and that there are a bit of an overrun option with the taxiway if you aren't quite back to if you need to stop by the end of the runway. You don't have to stop by that 499 meters, as you'll be normally, and we'll touch on this in a second. You'll normally be leaving the runway at the end. And another thing I would say about the runway length is just don't make this. Don't be tempted to try and land sooner than you normally would. Do your proper normal hold off. Land neatly on the back wheels. Don't try and land in a rush and end up landing flat on the front wheel or a little bit too fast. And you know what? You've already got in your back pocket the option to just go around if you don't like it. So that's the runway length. And then the runway surface. If you have only ever operated from grass or soft runways, then the hard runway will be a little bit different. I prefer them there, but they are a little bit less forgiving. And what I would say in particular about landing on a hard runway is don't be worried, use exactly the same techniques as normal, but the one thing that it is less forgiving on especially is your directional control when you touch down. So you need to make sure that the wheels of the aircraft, i.e. the nose of the aircraft, is pointed dead straight down the end of the runway. So make sure you've got the correct rudder control in the flare and the hold off. So you touch down with the wheels and the nose heading straight down the runway. Otherwise, you'll feel sort of pushed to the left or the right as you land, and you may then have to use a lot of extra rudder correction once you land to line back up with the runway. Also, if you're used to operating from a grass runway, they don't all have centre lines marked out. And all of a sudden, you're going to have a centre line there, or essentially it's a taxiway marking, but you've got a centre line on this runway. So really good opportunity to see how, if you can really nail that landing to get the nose wheel coming down right in that centre line. And same on takeoff, keep an eye on it and use it as an extra aid to help you stay dead straight on takeoff. Thing to note is that Redhill's a lot of helicopter traffic compared with some of the neighbouring airfields. And one thing that I'd like to mention is that you may find helicopter traffic using the main runway still, even though they're out of operation for fixed wing traffic. And you may also find helicopters using the heli strip here and the heli areas next to the runway. So what I'd say to you is just keep a good lookout for other helicopter traffic. And bear in mind that their circuit is to the south of the airfield, so there may be a slight overlap. Now, the air traffic controllers at Redhill are really great. They'll be on top of this, but they may warn you about helicopter traffic, in which case make sure you get your eyes on it and acquire it visually, and make sure you remain clear of it. When runway 0725 is in use, it generally means that we can't taxi on any part of the grass at Redhill, normally because it's far too soft and you're really likely to just get stuck almost immediately. Now, that does make a bit of a problem. If I bring the aerodrome chart up again, this part of the taxiway isn't really accessible. So we haven't got access all the way around the airfield. It's sort of a bit like a U-shaped taxiway with the runway that we're using in the middle. That means if you're over parked on this side by Redhill Aviation or Harvard, you need to go to the fuel, you'll have to go via the runway. And if there's anyone coming this way at the same time, then it becomes a bit of a complicated puzzle for air traffic control to manage. Now, they're really good at it. It's a really complicated thing, and it requires us pilots to be on our A game as well. So a few things that you might not be used to is there's quite a lot more backtracking that happens. Instead of just vacating the runway to the left or the right onto the grass. And to backtrack basically means to turn around and taxi in the opposite direction that you would take off a landing on the runway. And we might also find ourselves doing strange things like, say I'm landing on correction 25 and I want to go up here. But if there's someone waiting to depart at Delta 2, I may be asked to backtrack and then come away from the runway environment and do a U-turn somewhere. Common example of this they might ask us to go to Charlie and basically do a 180-degree turn and hold at Charlie 2, or the same at Bravo 2, or maybe even they might ask us to go around to the taxiway Foxtrot, which is a little loop where the fuel pumps are, and use that to go around. Now, what I'd say is just be careful, especially on Charlie. The taxiway is really quite narrow, and you need to just be on your again, make sure you go right the way to one side of the taxiway and apply full rudder, nice bit of brakes, but not enough to lock the wheel up, but just before that point with a bit of power to come around, and you should be able to turn nice and tightly to stay away from the soft surfaces. So another thing you can do to help air traffic control plan ahead is if you're landing and you're going to need some fuel afterwards, especially if you would normally taxi over to this side of the aerodrome, is let them know as soon as you can so they can plan ahead with what they're going to do with their ground movements. And also I'd mention is if you're waiting here or here for taxi instructions and there's someone just landed and they've got to come all the way back here before air traffic control can clear you back down, then expect delays. And that's just one of the joys of operating in the winter. But it could be worse. We could not have this facility at all and we could just be grounded, which would suck. While we're talking about this, the aircraft are often still parked on the grass, which is normally quite waterlogged. One of the techniques for parking the aircraft in this situation is to taxi along and at the last minute turn in the taxiway 90 degrees so the tail of the plane is facing towards the parking space you're going to use, switching off, shutting down the aircraft and getting out and then pushing it backwards onto the grass. What this tends to mean is a lot of the aircraft are parked quite close to the taxiway. So one real risk can be not enough wingtip clearance when you're taxiing out. So what I'd say to you is just be aware. If you're flying with an instructor and you're not happy, just say to them, look, I can't judge this. Can you have control and taxi me out of here? And I'd say to instructors and anyone else operating on their own, if you're totally unsure, there's no harm in just stopping, getting out and having a look. And pushing aircraft another foot back if it needs to, or getting someone to marshal you out are both good options. Next thing I want to mention is the time of day. It gets this time of year where the evenings become longer and longer and longer, and the sun sets sooner and sooner and sooner. So just be a bit aware of that. In the Redhill manual here about the airfield, there's a note here that says grass areas including the unlit runways, which includes 0725, are only available between sunrise and sunset. So just keep an eye on that sunset time. If you're not quite sure where to go to look for that sunset time, the AIP has some specific places to go and find it. It says here, go to the Her Majesty's Nautical Almac office and you can Google that. But you know what? If you just Google anything about the sunset time, even if you just stick Redhill, if you just stick Redhill sunset, that'll give you the time in local. And that's the time that you'll be expecting. Another good place to look is the Redhill Aerodrome website. And if you just go to the pilot information airfield briefing page, it gives you the sunset time here in both local and UTC. So just make sure you plan your flight to get back well before then. And a little note, if you are flying from Redhill Aviation, they've got an additional notice that is in place that says, and let's see if I can find it, says all students should finish 30 minutes before sunset. So make sure your lessons are planned to finish 30 minutes before sunset. So keep an eye on that. And then how do you even know when runway 725 is in use? Well, really what you should be doing is keeping a track of the NOTAMs every time before you fly. Head to wherever you get your NOTAMs from. Best place is the AIS website, and sign up there. It's totally free, and that's the official place to get NOTAMs from. And you can just see if runway 0725 is in use. What it will really say is that the other runways aren't in use, or that you can't taxi or operate on the grass surfaces, and that should basically prompt you to know that 0725 is in use. Another great place that I showed you just a second ago is the Redhill Aviation website, and it'll tell you on here if 0725 is in use. So those are the sort of things you should take into consideration when you're using runway 0725 from Redhill. If you've got any feedback or if there's anything I've missed, just have a little comment down below or send me a little email at flywithfinn@gmail.com. Or if you fly from Redhill Aviation, pop in and say hello. And look, good luck. Enjoy the winter flying. Can be some really beautiful days in the winter where it's cool, calm, crisp blue skies, normally still, smooth, and a real joy to fly in. So I really hope you get up on one of those days. And just remember that getting up at all is just a real treat. So yeah, thanks for that and enjoy your flying.